Algerians celebrate a decision from their long-ruling president not to run for a fifth term. But his simultaneous postponement of next month's election has critics worried he's trying to hold on to power anyway. Theresa May says the EU has given in on some legally binding changes to her Brexit deal. But will it be enough to help it pass a vote in Parliament later today? Our Europe editor on set with more. And in Venezuela, the blackout continues for a fifth day, crippling the nation's oil exports and leaving millions scrambling to find food and water. The opposition-led Congress there declaring a state of alarm. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on France 24 this hour. I'm Jeannie Godula in Paris. Well, 2 weeks of mass protests in Algeria finally forced the president to say he won't run for a fifth term. Abdelaziz Bouteflika has ruled the country for the past 20 years, but he abandoned that bid for a new term last night. At the same time, though, the veteran politician postponed next month's election without setting a new date, leaving many Algerians wondering if change is really on the way.
It's a happy day for every Algerian, no matter if you are from the east or the west. I can't express what I'm feeling right now. It's a real ray of sunshine.
There is no celebration until the Mafia, Yahya, Nahar TV, the major generals leave. This is our country and they all have to leave.
What would make us happy would be for the current government to leave. We would like to see this gang, which lets the young run away on small boats, leave.
The French President Emmanuel Macron is on a tour of Eastern Africa now. He's currently in Djibouti. Speaking from there, he hailed the news from Algeria, urging what he called a reasonable time for a political transition.
I welcome the decision taken by President Bouteflika, which opens a new chapter in Algeria's democratic development by putting in place this conference, by being transparent, and by announcing that he won't run again for office.
Well, Lamia Ashouch is a journalist and an activist who's based in Algiers, and she joins us now from there. Lamia, what is the feeling like there today? Are people there still very excited like they were last night about this announcement, or are they starting to feel perhaps like the government is just scamming them again?
Most definitely. The people here, after the jubilation and the happiness faded, are now realizing that this is not a complete victory. It is a partial victory, but not a complete one. Any transition period led by the current regime is definitely not a victory, because how would we know that the elections that they're going to organize are not going to be transparent? The sentiment here is that the president's extension of his fourth and current mandate is not constitutional and it's unlawful. And that is what many lawyers and constitutional experts are saying that by canceling the elections, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika is only extending his fourth term. And the Algerian constitution explicitly says that only in case of war that the president can extend his current mandate. And obviously, this is not the case in Algeria. And so we are cautiously optimistic, but we don't know how this will play out. We don't know how this current government is going to run the transition period. And we already know that he already put two regime people in place who are Noureddin Bedoui, the former interior minister and the now newly appointed prime minister, and former foreign minister Ramtan Lamamra, who's now vice prime minister, a newly created position. We don't know what this position serves. And so there's a lot of speculations, but I think there's a consensus that the fight is not over. There's already calls for major manifestations this Friday, this time not saying no to the fifth term, but saying no to the extended fourth term.
But if you're asking and saying no to this extended fourth term, how concretely are you going to try to make sure that that date gets set within a reasonable amount of time, as the French president said today?
Well, we don't know. What we know is that the people should keep going. They should not abandon their peaceful protests. They should not abandon their legitimate claims of change in Algeria and political reforms in Algeria. Definitely, the people don't feel like they triumphed. Yes, the president is not running, but he's still here. He's still president, and he will be president beyond his term. And in what world this could be considered a victory? People are not feeling it. And so, although we don't really know, they don't really know, the protesters don't really know how they're going to do it, or if the regime is gonna listen to them. But they already know that they should keep going on the streets, and they should keep calling for the peaceful change of this regime. So this is the sentiment here. The sentiment is that we should not give up. We should keep going until every single person in the current regime goes away. It's not the case today.
Lamia, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Lamia Chouch, there, a journalist and an activist based in Algiers. All right, next now, the Brexit clock is at just 17 days to that infamous deadline, March 29th. Theresa May, though, has presented a last-ditch attempt on her deal with the European Union. The British Parliament is due to vote on that deal this evening. The British Prime Minister sat alongside the European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, just yesterday to announce what they said were legally binding changes over the backstop for the Northern Irish border.
We reached an agreement last night with the British government on the conditions and consequences of Brexit. I told them that this was their second chance and that there won't be a third. So today I would like British MPs to support this plan, which is both British and European.
We have a chance now to leave the European Union on the 29th of March or shortly thereafter. And if we grab this opportunity tonight, we can do that. If we don't, we increase the risk both of a customs union outcome and possibly no Brexit, which I know is something none of my colleagues want.
Well, I'm joined now on the set for more by France 24's Europe editor, Catherine Nicholson. Catherine, talk us a bit more about through what's been agreed, what's being voted on today concretely.
Okay, so as you outlined there, Theresa May says that she does have legally binding assurances that this special arrangement, this backstop we've been talking about to ensure that no hard border re-emerges between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, that doesn't re-emerge, that will not become a permanent thing, because for that hard border not to re-emerge, they need to find sort of technical solutions to make customs checks, but keep that border invisible, essentially. So Theresa May thinks that she does have assurances from the EU, and she says that this is delivered on what Parliament has asked of her. So there are two aspects to this. One part is being referred to as a joint legally binding instrument, which means that if the EU is seen as trying to tie the UK into a sort of a long-term or an indefinite backstop situation, then the UK could start a formal dispute against the European Union. There's also a joint statement about the future relationship that the UK and the EU are going to try and come up with. And this is a commitment to replacing the backstop by December 2020, which is the end of the UK's transition period out of the EU. So the big thing that everyone's been waiting for today was the legal advice about this, because if it's not legally binding, then who knows what it could be thrown in the bin at any point. Geoffrey Cox is Britain's Attorney General. He's just issued his advice, and he has ruled on Theresa May's side. He said that these assurances do have a binding legal effect. He's going to be speaking a little bit later on, in about an hour and a half's time, obviously taking questions from members of Parliament as well. There's been rumours or accusations that he was under pressure to approve what Theresa May brought back here in order to push her Brexit deal over the line. He denied earlier on that he was ordered in any way to validate this. We will hear more from him, like I said, in about an hour and a half.
All right, so that's then for the vote later today. Talk us through what happens if that vote's passed or not, and the other votes that are coming up the rest of the week.
Absolutely, yes. So today, British Parliament has what's called a meaningful vote. This is essentially their ratification or not of Theresa May's deal that she's found with the European Union. Tomorrow, if that is voted down, there'll be a vote on whether to allow or refuse the no deal scenario. And on Thursday, if obviously the no deal has been rejected as well, then the possibility of voting to ask the EU for a short, time-limited delay to leaving the European Union. So absolutely massive week in terms of Brexit news.
Now, all of this is developing minute by minute, as we've been saying, but what kind of reactions have you been hearing so far, both from the UK and from the EU?
Well, there's been a lot of people who are waiting to hear from Geoffrey Cox. So now that his legal advice has just come out, everyone will be scrutinising that to see if the T's are crossed and the dots are on the I's. David Davis, for example, a former Brexit minister, saying that the deal might just be about acceptable if Geoffrey Cox says robustly that these assurances have legal weight. He said if Geoffrey Cox is at all equivocal about it, I think it will fall again. Jacob Rees-Mogg, a very ardent pro-Brexit Conservative MP, waiting for the legal advice. He was saying earlier he thinks it might be better to have this meaningful vote pushed into Wednesday to give everybody time to scrutinise what May brought back from Strasbourg and the legal advice from Geoffrey Cox. That's being repeated by some others as well, including, quite crucially, the Northern Irish Party, the Democratic Unionists, who sort of propping up Theresa May's party and giving them their majority in Parliament. They've been saying, for example, their chief whip, that they were waiting for the Attorney General's opinion, studying the agreement, and another DUP member of Parliament saying that perhaps the government could delay the meaningful vote. So a lot of hesitation, a lot of people sort of saying we don't want to be rushed into this. On the opposition side, the Labour Party, the biggest opposition, saying bluntly that they will vote against Theresa May's deal in the meaningful vote. There's nothing new in there as far as they're concerned. So for Theresa May, it's very, very clear she needs to get every single one of her Conservative Party lawmakers on side and every single one of those Northern Irish DUP.
Kat, thank you so much for that. That's Catherine Nicholson, our Europe editor, and Theresa May will be speaking live from Parliament about 1:30 p.m. Paris time. We'll be covering that live for you here on France 24, so be sure to tune in for that. Next now, Venezuela is facing its fifth straight day of a widespread blackout. On Monday, opposition leader and self-declared interim president Juan Guaido addressed the country's National Assembly. He urged lawmakers to issue a state of alarm over the blackouts that have reportedly claimed at least 15 lives as hospitals struggle to care for kidney patients. President Nicolas Maduro has promised to distribute large amounts of food aid and fuel as power has slowly begun to return, but only intermittently. Meanwhile, another effect of the power outage has emerged: water shortages. Erin Ogunkeye reports.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. Few proverbs describe the current situation in Venezuela so accurately. Here, Venezuelans gather around a river in Caracas to collect water, much of which comes from a drain pipe carrying sewage. The residents say local authorities released the water here from reservoirs.
You have to look for water wherever you can find it because there's none in the neighborhood.
I'm carrying water out of necessity to flush the toilet, to bathe with, because you can't use this for human consumption.
As Venezuela's power blackout drags into its fifth day, the side effects of the crisis deepen. Without electricity to pump water, thousands of people are struggling to cook, clean, take showers, and flush toilets. Caracas alone needs 20,000 liters of water per second from nearby watersheds to maintain its service. Prior to the blackout, that number had already fallen to 13,000 liters. And since the electricity cuts, the service has halted completely. Elsewhere in the capital, hundreds of exasperated residents blocked a highway to demand authorities deliver a cistern to supply water in the Charneca neighborhood.
How do we tell our children that there's no water, no cell signal, no electricity? There's nothing. For how long? Maduro, just leave already.
Nicolas Maduro has blamed the water crisis, too, on the United States, which he accused of carrying out a cyber attack on a hydroelectric dam. The Venezuelan president has not offered any evidence to support his claims.
To Iran now, where the judiciary says it has sentenced a prominent human rights lawyer to 7 years in prison for defending protesters against the Islamic Republic's mandatory headscarves for women. But in a post on Facebook, Nasrin Sotoudeh's husband said the verdict delivered to his wife in jail was a total of 38 years imprisonment and 148 lashes. Sotoudeh previously served 3 years in prison for her activism and was released in 2013 before being arrested again last June. June. The headscarf or hijab is mandatory for all women in Iran. And car makers Renault, Nissan and Mitsubishi have announced a new joint board to be led by Renault chairman Jean-Dominique Senard. This will replace two existing alliance structures based in the Netherlands. The alliance is trying to map out its future after the downfall of former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn. He was removed as chairman after his arrest last November on charges of underreporting his salary. He was released on bail of €8 million last week. Ghosn does still remain a director of the company. He wanted to attend the board meeting in Tokyo, but was barred by the court. All right, we'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for watching France 24. Do stay with us. I'll be back in about 15 minutes with more headlines.